Hello, everyone. All right, it is 6 p.m., so we will make a start with tonight's event. So once again, good evening, everybody. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone here, both who are attending in person and also our guests online. So a bit about myself. I'm Lian So, the treasurer from Professionals in International Trade, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. So hopefully I don't stammer or stutter. If I do, please forgive me. I'd like to begin tonight's proceedings with a welcome to country. So I'll do that by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose lands on which we meet today. I'd like to extend my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging, and also extend that same respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. I'd also then want to acknowledge the partners for today's event. So firstly, we have Newland Global Group, who we've currently partnered with. Thanks to them for bringing together a wonderful team of speakers for tonight's event, and also coordinating a large chunk of tonight's festivities. Also, Advances for organizing and delivering the technology solution. We've got an online group of people joining us as well. The Consulate General of India, again, for hosting us and offering this wonderful space for us to meet and use today. And now a bit about Professionals in International Trade, which is the organization I represent. So we are a professional networking group, bringing together people who work in the international trade, industry, and investment development space. So the idea here is we are trying to help our members or those who join our events develop knowledge on topical issues relevant to international trade and investment. So it could be, for example, a think tank series we developed on the hydrogen economy, and its opportunities. It could be networking events. We have in the past we've had a speed networking event. It could be events like this where we educate our members on opportunities across different industry sectors or different countries. As like today, simplifying doing business in India. It helps our members also develop professional and business opportunities through their networking, in attending events, and also very interestingly, the sharing of job opportunities from both the network we represent and also to the network we represent, because often a lot of these service providers or corporate partners we work with do advertise job opportunities, and similarly, a lot of our members are looking for the same. Some of our PIT members include commercial advisors, or officers from consulates, or foreign trade commissions. For example, an Invest France, or an Invest India. We also have businesses who operate internationally, as being our members. For example, we have got Holland Wilcox, which is a law firm. They're a service provider, advising on international trade transactions, mergers and acquisitions. We have got BDO, who are an accounting services firm. Again, they provide advice on auditing and tax services. We've got industry associations too in our membership, and also finally service providers. Now tonight's topic is simplifying doing business in India. And I think it's a great time to be discussing about it, because just to highlight a few statistics, India has the world's largest population. It's just about or just overtaken China's at about 1.4 billion. It is already the world's third largest economy in PPP terms. So, and with the potential to become the second or even the largest economy later this century. It's got a huge amount of opportunity there. It's got significant English language proficiency, so I think trading, doing business with India is not going to be as much of an issue with compared to some other countries. And it's got a lot of economic complementarities in that, for example, Australia's natural resource base could be paired with India's, manufacturing, powerhouse potential. It's got a huge consumer market that will demand, steel and resources. International education, which is a key competitive advantage of Australia, can be leveraged by, a huge youth population in India. My understanding is more than half the population is under the age of 30. That is a potential market of 750 million people, or 700 million people, which is a huge number. And then there is also talk about the future of our world moving from what used to be the Asia Pacific to the Indo-Pacific. So if, late last century or early this century, we saw the growth of the Western Pacific, led by, the Japans, the Koreas, the Chinas of the world. In the future, going towards the middle of this century, even the later part of this century, the opportunities will shift to the Indian Ocean Rim, which is where India is located as a continent, where Sub-Saharan Africa, and in particular Eastern Africa, is located. There's a tremendous opportunity to also leverage trade and investment relations with them. I also note that the eastern part of Africa have got a substantial Indian diaspora, which can also be leveraged for that opportunity. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker for tonight. So that is Mr. Dipen Rughani. So he is the founder and CEO of Newland Global Group. He has led it since 2010. He's got over 25 years of experience in the trade and investment space. He's advised a wide variety of businesses in both the public and the private sectors. Those trading between Australia and India. And he has also led the Australia-India Business Council for 4 years, between 2012 to 16. So on to Dipen, who will deliver a speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're gathered, pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Manish Gupta, the Consul General of India to Sydney and to South Australia. Thank you so much for hosting us today and providing this yummy Indian food as well. We're all looking forward to that. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank professionals in trade. We have been discussing this particular event for a good part of 12 months. We just couldn't find time. And luckily now we've managed to find some time. So Alex, Lean, and all the youngsters that are involved in managing and organizing and the administration of professionals in trade, congratulations. Done a great job, and it's been great working with you guys on this event. And certainly looking forward to some of the comments that are going to be made today. I just wanted to build a narrative for you in regards to the Australia-India trade and investment relationship, where it's been, the journey that we've traveled and where it is today, just to set the scene for today's event and for some of the impressive speakers that we have lined up for you. So I guess from my perspective, having been involved in this area for over 25 years, the relationship has been a bit of a roller coaster ride. Depending on which government has been in power and which country that they're most interested in will depend on whether relationships go forward between the two countries. Up until 2014, when it really started to ramp up, when the Honourable Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister of Australia, he led a business delegation to India straight after the landslide victory for the BJP and the Narendra Modi government. This was the first visit of a foreign leader to congratulate Narendra Modi on his victory, and it was taken in a very respectful way, if I may say so, in that there was a nice hug, which is something that is very good when you meet with Prime Minister Modi. There was a warm rapport between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abbott. And there was an invitation for Prime Minister Modi to then visit Australia later on in the year. Both Prime Ministers in that first meeting agreed that there needs to be an uplift of the relationship. It was a bit dormant, and so they agreed that they will look at negotiating a free trade agreement, which was then called the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. They started work on that shortly after. Narendra Modi visited Australia, first time by an Indian Prime Minister in 28 years. The first time prior to that was in 1986, when Rajiv Gandhi visited Australia and Prime Minister Hawke was the Prime Minister, which is when the Australia-India Business Council was established in 1986. So move on to 2014, end of 2014, Prime Minister Modi visits Australia. Negotiations are on their way for the free trade agreement. 2015, the Honourable Andrew Robb, who was our Trade Minister, visited India at least 5 times to negotiate with Nirmala Sitharaman, who was then the Trade Minister for India. Unfortunately, the government changed in Australia and the negotiations for the free trade agreement stopped. Though the relationship and the movement or the momentum had continued, it wasn't until 2018 that the then Australian government commissioned a report called the India Economic Strategy to 2035. The India Economic Strategy was authored by Ambassador Peter Varghese, who was the ambassador or the High Commissioner of Australia to India, and on his return, he was appointed as Secretary for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. After he retired from DFAT, he was asked to write this report. It's a voluminous report, 500-page. It's like the Bible for Australian businesses who are looking to invest and work with India. It highlights 10 industry sectors that Australian businesses could invest in, that they have an advantage in, and also 10 states in which they could invest in India. The report also stated a couple of comments which I'd like to read to you, which are very important. It said, this is in 2018, there is no market over the next 20 years which offers more growth opportunities for Australian businesses than India. It also goes on to say that Australia should set itself a goal by 2035 to lift India into its top 3 export markets, to make it the 3rd largest destination in Asia for Australian outward investments, and to bring it into the inner circles of Australia's strategic partnerships and with people-to-people ties as close as any in Asia. The reason I say that is a large majority of the members in PIT are exporters, and Australia publicly declared that it wants to bring India into the top 3 as far as exports are concerned. This is an important point to reflect on. Following the report, obviously we've gone into COVID, and in 2020, in June 2020, the 2 prime ministers held a virtual summit. In that summit, they elevated the bilateral relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The CSP, as it was known, is based on mutual understanding, trust, common interests, and shared values of democracy and the rule of law. Through the CSP, both countries committed to working together across a range of sectors and areas. In this instance, looking at Australia's strengths and India's aspirations. In 2020, the Indian government also reciprocated with a report of its own called the Australia Economic Strategy. This is the first time ever that the Indian government had written a single country report. That says something for the relationship that was forming and has formed. This was written by and authored by Ambassador Allan, who is a close friend of ours and actually sits on the board of Newland Global Group. So following the first summit, the report that the Indian government released called the Australia Economic Strategy covered 12 sectors that were relevant for Indian businesses to invest in Australia, which was very different to the opportunities that were presented in the India Economic Strategy. Following this, in March 2022, the two prime ministers met again for a second summit, in which the Australian government committed to $282 million, a package to assist in the initiatives to bolster the strategic partnership that was formed between the two countries. Additionally, the government appointed Tony Abbott as the envoy, the special envoy to India. Newland Global Group worked with Mr. Abbott on renewing his knowledge of India and the stats on trade and investment before he was appointed by the government. Within 6 months of being appointed, he had visited India twice, met with Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, and started negotiations on an interim free trade agreement, or better known as the early harvest free trade agreement, which focused on low-hanging fruit and areas and sectors that were easy to work on between the two countries, rather than areas such as agriculture, which was a very sensitive issue for India, or investments and services and so on. Within 6 months, as I said, a free trade agreement was signed between the two countries, known as the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, or AI-ECTA. The AI-ECTA covers a comprehensive range of goods. 85% of Australian goods that are currently being exported to India will have reduced tariffs or nil tariffs. 96% of Indian goods being exported to Australia will have nil tariffs or reduced tariffs. What a great start. What a great start, particularly for exporters. And negotiations are now on the way to a comprehensive FTA, which would likely happen early next year. The IA-ECTA has to be ratified at Parliament, and we've been told that it is likely to happen within the next couple of months. So watch this space. It was very quickly followed by the Commerce Minister visiting Australia, Mr. Vish, a 3-day trip to Melbourne, Sydney, and Perth. Thereafter, the largest ever business delegation left the shores of Western Australia in July this year. 110 people, 75 businesses, sitting across 7 industry sectors. They were led by the Deputy Premier of Western Australia, Roger Cook. Newland Global Group was privileged and honoured to be advisors to the Western Australian government for this delegation. So, in closing, India is the world's largest democracy, one of the fastest growing major economies, a technology powerhouse, and a major power. India was Australia's 7th largest trading partner and 6th largest exporter in 2020, driven by coal and education. People-to-people links underpin the relationship, with the size of the Indian diaspora growing along with its contribution to Australia's economy and multicultural landscape. Prior to COVID-19, India's economy was world's 3rd largest in PPP, as Leanne explained earlier, and was forecast to become the 3rd largest in the world by 2030 in market exchange rate terms. India recorded its first economic contraction in 40 years in 2020. Over the longer term, India's strong fundamentals, its youthful demographics, burgeoning consumer class, steady urbanization, unmet infrastructure investment demands, and digitalization and formalization of the economy are expected to drive sustained growth. Australian businesses, however, has long put India in the too hard basket. There are three overriding reasons of why this must change: scale, complementary economies, and sustained growth. For Australian companies with a global focus, the key question is whether they can afford not to be in what is the fastest growing large economy in the world. Thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you for that, Dipen. Thank you for setting the scene and providing an overview of this strengthening relationship, both politically and economically, between India and Australia. I'd like to move on to our next speaker. So we have Allan Poon, who is joining us online. He is the first secretary with the Australian High Commission in New Delhi, with responsibility for Australia-India economic relations. He's previously held roles in Canberra at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and also the Australian Treasury, and has expertise in foreign policy, international relations, economics, fiscal policy, and taxation. He's got a master's degree in Asia Pacific Studies from ANU, the Australian National University, and also bachelor degrees from the University of Western Australia in Arts and Economics. Allan will provide us, a government and foreign policy lens to our topic today. For example, progress on the trade agreements which are being negotiated. So on to you, Allan, who's joining us online.
Thank you, Lane, and thank you for that very kind introduction. And thank you as well to you, Dipen, for a fantastic overview of the development of the relationship over several years. I'm delighted to speak to everybody today from here at the Australian High Commission in New Delhi. And I want to acknowledge the efforts of Mr. Manish Gupta and the Indian Consulate General, as well as the professionals in international trade and Newland Global Group in organising today's event. An event on simplifying doing business in India has never been more timely or important. As Leon mentioned, India has all the right fundamentals. It's the world's fastest growing major economy, and it's fast becoming the world's most populous nation. And as Dipen outlined, the bilateral relationship is at an all-time high under our comprehensive strategic partnership. Governments on both sides have made great strides in creating opportunities for businesses in both countries. This year, we have seen already 5 Indian government ministers visit Australia, representing portfolios across trade, education, energy, mining, and culture. Last month, we had not one but 2 large trade missions visit India, led by WA Deputy Premier Roger Cook and New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet. And as was abundantly clear from these trade missions, Australian businesses are excited about the potential that India offers. And there is no substitute to coming here and seeing firsthand India's economic transformation and the opportunities that this presents. In April this year, Australia and India signed an Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, or ECTA, and I can't overstate how significant this is. It's India's first trade deal with a large developed country in a decade. Through ECTA, we can deepen trade and economic ties across a range of sectors, including critical minerals, professional services, education, and tourism. And as Dipen outlined, upon entry into force, 85% of Australian goods exports to India will see tariffs eliminated. Australian consumers will benefit from almost 96% of Indian goods entering Australia duty-free, and this will rise to 100% after a period of 4 years. Reflecting the importance of education, Australia has for the first time confirmed post-study work rights and will extend access to graduates across science, technology, engineering, and maths. Through ECTA, Australian industry is well positioned to help India achieve its clean energy goals by supplying lithium and critical minerals which are essential for high-end technologies like electric cars and solar panels. And this will support India's ambitions to take a major role in global advanced manufacturing, as well as its target of producing 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. It will also help build the diverse, competitive, and resilient clean energy supply chains that are so critical for the security and prosperity of our region. The Australian government this year also updated the India Economic Strategy, or IES, and building on India's landmark Australia Economic Strategy, the IES includes a range of new investments, including in public sector linkages, community engagement, education, resources, connectivity, low emissions technology, business literacy, science, and technology. And these investments will create opportunities for Australian business. Australian businesses looking to explore the India market can and should draw on the support of Austrade, which is Australia's lead agency for promoting trade and investment. Austrade runs the Australian government's flagship trade and investment program for India, which is called the Australia-India Business Exchange, AIBX or ABEX, and this supports Australian businesses seeking to enter and expand in India. Through ABEX, Australian businesses can get critical information, including on the latest market insights and commercial opportunities, as well as help build important relationships and partnerships across government and industry. And I want to highlight a few examples of sectors where there is great opportunity. India is pushing to upskill its workforce and internationalise its education sector. The Future Skills Initiative, which is a 4-year program led by Austrade, will support these goals through partnerships with TAFEs, dual sector universities, skilling organisations, and education technology companies. And on technology, India has cemented itself as a global powerhouse, with leading tech firms like TCS, Wipro, and Infosys driving innovation in India and Australia. Austrade is establishing an Australia-India Innovation Network to support Australian tech firms by raising awareness of market opportunities, providing advice, and helping build connections. India's infrastructure sector offers great opportunities for Australian firms to contribute to residential developments, rail modernisation projects, road safety, intelligent transport systems, energy storage, smart grids, etc., etc. And we are working to establish an Australia-India infrastructure forum to increase two-way infrastructure investment, build business links, share regulatory expertise, and give Australian businesses an avenue to engage directly with the Indian government. On mining and resources, India's privatisation and reform agenda has created opportunities for Australian firms across mining equipment, technology and services, critical minerals, and in the provision of specialist expertise, including in the coal sector. On food and agribusiness, Australia can leverage its reputation for clean, safe and reliable produce. Indian demand for premium food and beverages is growing rapidly. A burgeoning middle class wants nutritional supplements, and Indian food processing companies are looking for partners to supply high quality agricultural produce. Finally, India's healthcare sector is growing rapidly, driven by rising incomes, increased health awareness, and easy access to insurance. India wants to partner with medtech companies to develop new therapies, drugs, and vaccines. And India also wants to partner with Australian institutions on research and development and health workforce training. So this is just a flavour of the opportunities presented by a dynamic and modern India, and some of the steps we have taken to help ease and simplify doing business in India. And I encourage you to reach out to the High Commission and Austrade to learn more. Thanks.
Great, and thank you for that speech, Allan, and keep providing us that government and foreign policy perspective on to tonight's topic. We now move on to the third speaker for the night, who is Mr. Manish Gupta. He's the Consul General of India here in Sydney, and he joins us in person. So Mr. Gupta is a career diplomat and a member of the Indian Foreign Service since 1998. He has held various positions in New Delhi and abroad, extensive experience in dealing with multilateral issues across a diplomatic career spanning over 20 years. Prior to assuming his current responsibilities, he served with the Ministry of External Affairs as the Joint Secretary for Overseas Indian Affairs, overseeing migration and mobility, immigration policy, labor and manpower cooperation, skill development initiatives, welfare and the protection of overseas Indians, and related matters. Manish tonight will provide us an overview of the opportunities of doing business in India, and how the Indian consulate here in New South Wales, Sydney, can assist businesses in doing so. So, warm welcome to Manish.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Leah, for a quite generous introduction. Many thanks to PIT, Newland Global Group, for putting together this event. In the Consulate, we are really privileged to host you over here for this very important evening. For us in India, for our Australian friends here, this is a momentous month. Very recently, as some of you would remember, we celebrated India's 75th anniversary of independence on 15th of August. What a nice time to build upon this to one of the most important pillars of this relationship, but where I think the potential is yet to be fully tapped. And that's why that makes it so important to all of us. Many thanks to all my friends from India who are joining us, Mr. Vish, Padmanabhan, Allan from the High Commission and others. I think together from here and from India, we can provide you a holistic perspective. I'm really happy Dipen has done a great job for me. He has put, and Allan also, the benefits, the highlights of the ICTA and the developments that have happened in this relationship. But let me very briefly, take you through India's journey for the last 30 years. 30 years, I say so because in 1991, India liberalized its economy. And since that, it has been a very impressive journey when it comes to India's modernization and its socio-economic progress. During this last 30 years, India's GDP has gone more than 10 times. We have registered on an average 6 to 7% GDP growth on a yearly basis. And what makes us fully on that scale, you can think by the end of this decade, as Dipen was saying, India will be the third largest economy in the world. And that speaks on the strides that we have made. But what is another important thing that has happened during the last 8 years? I think I need to very briefly explain to you what drives the modern India. During the last 8 years, what the Indian government has done is providing 3 key elements to each and every Indian individual and the households. In very simple terms, it's about establishing a digital backbone of India. Today, every Indian has a digital identity. We call it Aadhaar card. It's on the lines of US Social Security number. Second, every Indian household has a banking account. And the third point, we all are enabled through mobile phones. For a country of 1.4 billion people, it's a momentous achievement. And that's why the rapid scaling of transformations that you see now is built upon this digital backbone that we talk about right now. A mere 6 years ago, the Indian government were thinking about, for a vast majority of 1.4 billion people, half of them are living in the rural areas. How you bring these people as part of your banking system, provide them the digital cards, credit cards. In the government system, we come through an open source architecture we call the UPI, Unified Payment Interface. This platform, in less than 6 years, last month I was looking at the figures, it handles 6 billion transactions a day. $130 billion revenue flows through this per month. And that's the scale of transformations we're talking about. Less than 6 years ago, we started something called Digital India. Once we started, India has at that point of time less than 500 startups. To be more precise, there were just 471 startups in India. Today, when we talk about, we have nearly 75,000 startups, 100 unicorns, and the figures are increasing very rapidly. So these are transformations happening because the basic system that we need, the digital backbone to scale up the transformations, that is already in. And when we are doing these things, we are doing in collaborative partnership with all our friends, including our friends in Australia. Many of you will have some of the not so good memories about the Delta wave system in India. We are thankful to all of you for your support. But what India did thereafter, because that was a time when we were in the process of manufacturing the vaccines. In less than 6 months, we had put up the entire framework in place. We were able to vaccinate all the eligible Indians, provided vaccines to over 100 countries around the world. And moreover, we set up a COVID portal. It's a perfect digital portal. There's no physical paperwork. It has a database of all the Indians who have been vaccinated. You don't need to show any physical paper. Show the COVID portal that you are vaccinated for COVID-19. So that's how the young Indians are transforming India. And when it comes to Australia, one thing always, excites me, because this is one of the very few countries in the world where we have perfect complementarities. Australia is so abundantly rich in natural resources, and India, our requirements are immense. They are huge. Second, a lot of tech and innovation also I have sensed comes here from the universities. But the challenge here, I always feel the universities are always struggling, how to scale it up or take that innovation to the markets. On the other hand, in India, we have a robust ecosystem right now. If you have a perfect product, the market is ready to finance. The market is ready to build upon those gains. I come from a very small town in India. We call it tier 2 or tier 3 cities. This town is famous, for educating Indian students, youngsters who have a dream to going to, let's say, to the premier Indian institutes of technology or medicine. So we have almost 150,000 students coming from all over India who will congregate this town for studies. Only earlier this year, I was so pleasantly surprised. One of the institutes who prepares these students got a $650 million in venture capital funding. So that's the scale of transformation. I'm just giving an example that is driving the thing. And that's where I feel Australian businesses also need to avail this opportunity. It's about going with an open mind and also have a degree of patience and perseverance. And when I say this to you, I'm pretty conscious, because don't think India is a monolithic entity. We are a union of states. We are more like the European Union. We have 28 states. It's a federal setup, where states have also their own powers, but it also gives you double benefits. Apart from the government of India's schemes like the production-linked incentive scheme that offers you certain benefits when you want to invest in India, the states also offer you certain tax benefits or concession arrangements, because each state is competing with others to attract the industry, whether it's domestic or the foreign. At the current level of development also, think about it. We call Bengaluru or Silicon Valley, but Bengaluru has the presence of 400 Fortune 500 companies right now. And this scale of transformation is happening everywhere. So you see the emergence of clusters. When we talk about biotech, you will see in the Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, in the southern states, the automotive clusters. So you have a perfect ecosystem that is there to support you, to realize your dreams. And that's where, again, in Australia, we have a perfectly well-developed institutional framework also, because I always believe any partnership requires well-developed institutions to take it forward. With the signing of the Ekta agreement, Hindi acronym will roughly becomes Ekta, which means unity. In a true sense, it's a watershed agreement which unites both the countries. But after that, we have a diaspora over here. It's a living bridge. And the Indian diaspora in Australia mostly consists of professionals, students, businessmen, and they are the ones who are the main drivers of this relationship. So with them, they are the important levers, to facilitate your entry, your access into India. In Consulate, we are there. The Australian High Commission back home in India is there. We are there to support you in the endeavors. We have Invest India, who will handhold you in India if you have an investment each and every stage. Likewise, you have the Australian over there. We have the business chapters. The Australian India Business Council is there. Mr. Irfan Malik is there. He's the New South Wales chapter president over there. The Newland Global Group. We have a well-developed array of institutions who are there to support you. So let's make the best use of this opportunity. And always remember, for a big country like us, once again, let me repeat, patience and perseverance is needed. It's a huge market. You can play a very long innings. There's no point, to be heartbroken, at the very first step. And always remember Henry Ford when he said, even in the most difficult of circumstances, you should always remember when an airplane takes off against the wind, not with it. So that's important. And I think that will drive this relationship forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful overview, Manish, of the opportunities of doing business in India. It's a great place to, trade with and invest in. Now we move to what potentially will be the most exciting part of tonight's event. We have a panel discussion bringing together a number of representatives, from the public and private sectors. So first of all, there will be some people joining us in person and online. I'd like to, we have Dipen Rughani, so CEO of the Newland Global Group, who's joining us in person. We have Irfan Malik, President of the Australia-India Business Council. He is also the National Chair of the Startups and Innovation Chapter of the AIBC, and over 25 years of experience in supporting and mentoring startups globally, both in India and Australia. We have got Vish Padmanabhan, Trade and Investment Commissioner from the New South Wales Government, who's joining us online. So Vish has been the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for India and the Middle East now with Investment New South Wales. And he's seen an international career over 35 years, combining high-level executive roles in the technology sector, together with partner level roles in professional services firms in Australia, the ASEAN countries, and also India. We also have Ajay Sethi, founder and managing partner of ASA Associates, who joins us online. Ajay is the managing partner of ASA. In 1991, he created India's answer to the big four consulting and accounting firms. Besides providing vision and strategy to his practice, he also guides the advisory teams and their clients on potential business partners, joint venture candidates, and acquisition targets in India. Next, we also have Nandish Vyas, senior partner of AZB and Partners. So Nandish is a senior partner with that organization and has close to 2 decades of experience in corporate, private equity acquisitions, mergers, and restructuring transactions. He has assisted regulators in framing rules for corporate and competition laws, and is recognized for his work by leading publications and journals. Then we have got Nashid Chowdhury, who is the Trade and Investment Commissioner, this time from the Western Australian government. Nashid joins us from the Western Australian Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, and has over 2 decades of experience in the economic development, investment, and trade space. Finally, we have got Natasha Jabaska, who is the General Manager at Newland Global Group. She'll be the facilitator for tonight's panel discussion. She comes with extensive public policy experience in trade and investment, with prior policy experience as well working with the Indian Parliament. She was awarded the Young Professional of the Year in 2019 as part of the India-Australia Business and Community Awards, and was recently named a Young Woman to Watch in International Affairs. So on to Natasha, who will moderate tonight's panel discussion.
Thank you.
And yeah, for those who are interested.
This one?
So there's a camera there, so you get your image. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So good evening. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us today on this very important event, I would say. And as we have received already a very excellent overview from the Consul General Dipen, as well as from Allan, on what the India growth story looks like, what really are the new India opportunities, and the fact that all of you are here today in this room, and also a lot of people joining us online, establishes the interest that you all have in the new India opportunities. Thank you very much for joining us today on this event. We really appreciate that. Now, there's a lot of optimism, hope around the India market opportunity, and as Consul General already mentioned about the pace and scale of the India market, what really it offers, young demographics, the rising aspirations, extensive digitization across India, and also in terms of the kind of potential that the market offers to you and your businesses. So let's try and understand with a very esteemed panel today joining us from India and also here, what are their insights when it comes to entering, exploring, and expanding in the India market. I'll start with you, Vish. Thank you for joining us, Vish. My first question to you, what really are NSW's ambitions in terms of attracting NSW companies in the India market? What's your experience been like in terms of guiding them, advising them? What sort of interest do you receive?
Well, thanks, Natasha, and I hope that you can all hear me.
Yes, we can.
Good. Let me just begin by acknowledging the Consul General, my colleague Manish Gupta, and Dipen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a privilege to be here. Traditionally, the relationship between New South Wales and India has been a trade-based. So 70% of the transactional value is on trade. And we're seeing a lot of demand across a number of sectors, a number of companies from health, pharmaceuticals, education, mining equipment, technology, advanced manufacturing want to do business in India and take advantage of emerging markets, but also take advantage of uniformity in transaction, uniformity in legislation, and increased ability to engage with the different states of India. So that's been very, very interesting to see that demand is increasing across those sectors. And as I think Manish had made the point that engaging with India now is a bit different because there's increased transparency and connectivity and increased velocity on the ground. And so that's what we're seeing. And of course, there are a number of advice and guidance sort of measures that we give to be more successful. And I'm happy to talk about that later on, Natasha. But just to answer your question, we're seeing a lot of interest from companies in Australia and, of course, New South Wales to engage in those sectors that I just mentioned.
Thank you, Vish, for that. And the fact that there's a lot of interest coming in, and you also saw the former trade minister visiting India and was in Gujarat as well as in Maharashtra to showcase the opportunities that exist in NSW, and also to encourage NSW companies to come to the India market. Over to you, Nashid. You've just led a very strong, large business delegation to India, and we saw the Deputy Premier very actively participating across 4 different cities, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Visakhapatnam. What's been the experience like? What's your understanding? It's one of the largest business delegations from Western Australia, largest ever, 110 members, 75 businesses. What were the queries like, and how you think that you're going to sustain this momentum going forward?
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you, Manish ji, for hosting us today. Professionals in Trade, Dipen, Natasha, so good to see you again. Fellow delegates and many friends in Sydney, because I used to previously live in Sydney. So to tell you about the enormity of this delegation is really about how big WA's economy is. So hands up, has anyone been in Perth in the audience? No?
Quite a few, but quite
Quite a few? I just can't see it. So basically, you know, we're 1/3 of the country. We're about a $362 billion economy. Interestingly enough, we're only 10% of the population. 65% of exports going out of Australia comes out of WA. We account for 17% of that total trade investment relationship between Australia and India, which gives us a good base to grow from. And also we've got the largest growing multicultural diaspora coming from India and the largest number of source students coming from India. So what that's done is created this hype in our economy about what this India means to them. So when we were recruiting for the mission, we got 110 delegates, but we got about 150 applications coming in. So that was the enormity of the appetite from the Western Australian businesses. You know, we're known as the #1 mining investment destination, but our vision is really about diversifying our economy across 8 sectors, including energy, innovation, space, defense, health, life sciences, education, tourism, creative industries, and primary industries. So it was really important that when we're reconnecting with India, where we've got a relationship for over 25 years, it was really important to tell the stories of our businesses across this diverse economy. And I think we achieved that. During the mission alone, we had $20 million worth of transactions made. So it was quite interesting because we had a scale of businesses that were just here to fact find. Others were just really about, you know what, we've been burnt in India in the past. We want to reconnect that relationship and really help to expand that networks. But we had companies that were very, very bullish and had already had a fair bit of engagement with India, and there were the announcements that were announced. So we had this scale which helped us really drive about $300 million worth of economic impact. You know, one of our most interesting industries were the Western rock lobsters, which were heavily impacted by China. So what happened was when we took them to India, we took them with that expectation. Don't expect this to be China. This is a very different market, and come in to embrace yourself in what that means. And I think that's what really was that success. And we landed our first rock lobster deal as well in the lead up to the mission. So the big other highlight was that we opened up an office in Chennai. So we have an office in Mumbai, and now we have an office in Chennai to be able to service that region. But what I'd say to businesses is, you know, really leverage this federal and state government missions that are on, because it gives you access to opportunities which you wouldn't likely have. And working with partners such as Newland Group, CII and Austrade during that time was particularly fundamental, and especially with the support of DFAT, where we had about 10 ministerial engagements, which was really powerful for not only the G2G engagement to then unlock that B2B potential. Also connecting with the local ecosystem, like Manish ji said, business councils, those industry networks. And if you haven't invested in your right in-house resources around investment and trade, it's a good opportunity to work with the right kind of contacts to do that. And the offshore networks. I mean, Vish obviously leads the New South Wales portfolio. I do it for India Gulf in Western Australia. It's so important to make that connect, because when we know what you're looking for, we can help you find it. We can then work with other agencies to support you on your journey with India. And I think that's particularly important. And also being able to position your stories. I think that's really, really particularly important. I think for our delegates who have come back, the big piece was really what their value proposition was coming back from India. Natasha, the success of the mission is we've already had three businesses come back already. And in the weekend, we're about to expect our next one. And what we're trying to do with our businesses is really stint it to around major events coming up, so that it gives them further access and we build ancillary programs with them. And very shamelessly, I just want to say, guys, come to WA. We've got amazing opportunities here, and there is a very strong India WA ecosystem that's growing. So would strongly encourage that.
Thanks for that, Nashid. So sustaining the momentum, of course, is key to really living up to the expectations that were created by your department for the Western Australian businesses, and in terms of what you have achieved through this delegation and the interest that you have received from these businesses also. Ajay, the fact that you lead such an enormous setup of the ASA with 800 partners on ground, and a firm that started with an ambition to take on the big four. Your insights on navigating the India market in terms of how should the businesses here understand, because a lot of times what we get to hear is India is a difficult market, and we tend to say India is a diverse market. What really will be your suggestion, after engaging with both Indian and international clients across different continents?
Thank you, Natasha. You're asking me to answer these very interesting questions while I see many of you enjoying wine. That's a tough one for one sitting in India, just not getting his lunch at the moment. Nevertheless, first of all, let's set the backdrop. I think everybody's talked about economic data and all, and I think everybody in this room knows it. So let's not go there. Let's pick up some basic things. What is the global outlook towards India, and what's happening on the ground zero? What is the government doing? So if you look at it globally, the requirement of China +1 is real, and India, along with some other countries, is actually a contender for that position of China +1, and that is something which is good. The second aspect which is worth looking at is that the middle class, which is the consuming class, is going to be shifting, as per the Brooklyn report. 56% of the world, based on purchasing power parity, is going to be in Asia. No doubt China is going to be leading it, but India is going to be the #2 consumer. And that's something to mark. That's something to mark, and I'll come back to that in a second from now. The foreign direct investment, which kind of dried up. We have been, as you rightly pointed out, we have been doing India strategy, entry strategy for 30 odd years now. And we have been seeing that there is a constant movement up on foreign direct investments. We had seen a dry up from Japan, we had seen a dry up from France, but consistently it's been moving up. And of course, it's helping our business also, that goes without saying. The third issue is the FTAs. My government had been very shy of foreign trade agreements. We had committed but not moved forward. But the accelerated effort which I see now, it is tremendous. Not just Australia, but UK, Europe, there is a lot happening. So let's keep the global perspective on one side, and let's look on the other side, what is happening on the India front. One of the most interesting things I've seen, it besides the foreign direct investment, is that the Indian SME has got a higher risk appetite, which during the COVID period completely disappeared. Not just that people were staying at home, but their business outlook was unclear. Now I see a high risk appetite, which is always good for an economy. The Make in India initiative is doing well for India, and there has been extensive movement from other countries into India. Coming to that famous domestic consumption, a very interesting statistic is, if you take 20 years back India, or even 30 years back, if you take the wallet, our discretionary spending was very low. It was somewhere in the range of 26. Essentials was the main items which we were buying. Now we are going discretionary at the rate of 70%. Now that's a tremendous change for a country, which means that we will soon be in the area where China is and consume luxury items, which makes it attractive to invest in India from a very different perspective. Indian government, what has it done? The laws have changed. I mean, we have a lawyer on board who will elaborate more, but as a consultant on the side, I can tell you GST, insolvency bill, corporate law completely changed. These are things which are bringing in transparency. And I've been in this business for 31 years, and believe me, I was waiting for these moments when these old archaic laws would move out of the picture. And now I see that happening. Government spending on infrastructure is real. It is happening at a very high pace. And therefore, these are setting up a very good, against this, what is the challenge? One, don't confuse India, which was pointed out by Manish also. India is not a homogeneous base. You can't assume that everything is there. So there is every state, and he mentioned 28. Imagine different tastes, different culture, different religions, different languages. English is the binding factor in somewhere in a strange sort of a way, but that's the thing. So don't confuse. So if you're looking, I'll come to India and I'm going to sell in India, unless you are a giant, like a Unilever or something, take down your ambition, match it to your product, and take it to a state where you can experiment and take it forward. So that's our number one advice. Don't view India as a singular country. View it as different, and then you'll be able to develop a very good market entry strategy. Number two, India has a very unique problem, which you will never see in most part of the world. We have a supply problem. We don't have a demand problem. Rest of the world has demand problems. We have a supply. Our supply chains are not so well developed. And that's a challenge, but that's also an opportunity because demand is extremely high. Where else would you want to buy a Mercedes car and you'll have to wait for 6 months to a year? Where do you want to sell a Honda City, the most simple of cars, and still you'll get a 6 months waiting? And the same thing applies again and again. So demand is extremely high, but the supply has to be managed well. The third issue, and which I will elaborate later, I'll just leave it as a thought. When do you need a partner? First question is, do I need a partner? And if I do need a partner, how do I deal with the partner? Now, this is it's a very interesting question. I will not elaborate on it right now. Maybe if you wish me to elaborate, I'll do. But one of the important things is define your long-term strategy or your short-term strategy. If you are looking at just testing the market, you can set up a liaison office. If you're looking at a project office, if you're looking at testing the market, a branch office, if you're looking at a long-term thing, then you have got to have your strategy clear. You got to ask certain questions, and that questions will help you define how do I come into India. But I think I'll stop here right now. I've given you a flavor of things, and we can pick it up more later.
Indeed, you have, Ajay. So categorically, you need to identify whether you're you're getting into the India market with a short-term strategy or with a long-term strategy. And as I'll just quote Rama Vijayapurkar, famous consultant, who often says, India is like a kaleidoscope. Every time you turn it, you get a different picture, enticing and very real. Nandish, coming from the legal ecosystem, what's your take on doing business in India? How India has changed? And is there something like an Indian way of doing business?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Gupta, Allan, Dipen for the excellent comments that sort of set the tone for the discussion. And of course, all my co-panelists here. In terms of, how things have changed in India and talking a little bit about the legal ecosystem, I think the last 10 years has seen some very, very important changes in terms of, how laws have been simplified and made more relevant for businesses. So you start with FDI, foreign direct investment. I think about a couple of decades back, there were very few sectors that you could come in through the automatic route. That changed in 2004. In the last decade, we've seen a large number of changes, clarifications, and also liberalizations, which have sort of allowed almost all sectors now to be opened up, except for certain sensitive sectors. In terms of the corporate organization, the Companies Act has come in. It's a new act in comparative terms, but has significantly streamlined things and made things simpler. You've got very recently, the labor codes which have come in, and that goes to the point of simplification of laws, where almost over 50 to 100 acts or statutes were simplified into 4 labor codes, which were theme based. That's still getting implemented, but you can see that direction is correct. In terms of laws that are aiding new businesses, what we see is that not only the government, but also the regulators such as the SEBI or the Reserve Bank of India are continuously making sure that they are up to date in terms of evolving of regulations, and that comes to whether it's e-commerce or whether it's fintech or whether it's banking related regulations, other relaxations. They're constantly sort of on the board. In terms of other aspects, generally getting licenses has become simpler. It's still a challenge considering it's central as well as state, but it is getting more and more simplified. There are more and more areas where single window clearances are permitted, particularly energy being one of them. And last but not the least, I'd like to take 30 seconds to talk about a change that happened just last week, which relates to overseas investments from India, and very well thought through changes, because what they have done is they are now specifically allowed, and I'm taking just 2 or 3 examples, education trusts from India to invest overseas in education institutions. They have allowed, or rather they've made a policy statement to say that strategic sectors such as natural resources, etc., the government will be far more flexible in terms of allowing higher than the typical limits of investment. So there are things like these which have shown that it's the government is thinking going forward, and therefore coming to the last part of your question, which is that in terms of India as a country, is there an Indian way of doing business? Yes, of course, that Indian way is very flexible, very indigenous, but at the same time is now getting more and more streamlined and organized. So it's in that sense, it's a melange of picking up good things from more organized markets, and at the same time trying to focus on our diversity and our speed and our strengths in terms of being indigenous.
Know your India strategy, as you rightly said, Nandish, and even in terms of the changes that has happened across different sectors to relax FDI norms. In fact, if one just has to give the figures, for the 8th consecutive year, India has actually set a record for FDI, which is $83.5 billion in March alone 2022. And this is the highest ever FDI received by India in its history. And this is for the 8th consecutive year. And this actually happened in the pandemic years, the last 2 pandemic years, and the FDI actually came across 57 sectors across 101 countries. So it talks about the scale and the pace of this market. The Invest India CEO was recently at the Australia-India Business Council International Business Summit. And when he said very categorically that you need to understand that this shows the trust of global economies in India's potential and its future. Capital moves where it is respected, where it has trust, and where it gets returns. And on these elements, India stands out prominently. And on that note, over to the President of New South Wales Australia-India Business Council chapter. Irfan, you had a very successful Australia-India Business Council International Summit last week. What was the experience like? What did you hear from companies? And how do you see this in terms of translating into solid business outcomes for NSW businesses getting into the India market and businesses in general?
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. Great to see some of those stats, because those stats that we hear when we talk about India, that's the new India opportunity. The scale of those opportunities, present as well, and something which we were able to quite well showcase at the summit, which concluded last week. Was a 3-day business summit, the first inaugural Australia-India International Business Summit, which is all aligned to the 75th year of India's independence celebration. But more focused, one of the core underlying theme that Australia-India Business Council, which has been around for 36 years plus, as Dipen mentioned, launched by the former Prime Ministers Rajiv Gandhi and Bob Hawke in 1986. Now, this summit was curated with a core theme, which is what underpins AIBC as well, is to enable people-to-people connect, which will deliver business-to-business outcome. And glad that we're beyond the COVID era, and we really wanted to showcase businesses and business leaders to connect. One of the core elements we wanted to really project as well is the new India opportunities. In fact, we were glad and very pleased. In fact, that was one of the highlights to host the Invest India CEO Deepak Bangla and the team, which really helped us. And then one of the things which we are trying actively, and all of us have a role to play in these forums as well, to drive the India literacy. What does the scale of opportunity look like? So Deepak really presented those opportunities across various sectors that we focused on. That included education, healthcare, we had defense, space, cybersecurity, tourism, hospitality, entertainment. We had advanced manufacturing, circular economy, sustainable energy, all those sectors, fintech, financial services, where the scale of Indian opportunity was presented. We matched that following, presenting that scaled opportunity for Australian businesses to showcase their capability. Because what we believe is Australian businesses have some amazing technology, amazing produce, which a market like India provides a scaled market opportunity, not only to service India, but also the other fringe market, whether Middle East or Southeast Asian, or even the African market, which was touched on as well. So what we were also able to really drive, in fact, there were quite a lot of insights, by sector. We were able to talk through some specific opportunities for businesses to connect and also launch into these, to address these market opportunities. What we also want to curate is beyond this summit, which was to kind of spark off and connect and create that literacy about Indian market. We want to create India market access pathways. So this will be very structured, very sector focused, rather than doing one big, market access program. By sector specific, we will do market access pathway programs. And we're also, trying to handhold. I'm always a believer in scoring some runs on the board, because once we have some success stories, those case studies, that will help build more momentum as well. So we did launch quite a lot of companies from India to Australia at the summit. We also had quite a lot of agreements done, a lot of initial, engagement also were all kicked off at the summit. And it really presented a good momentum, which we can leverage and build on. And it's something which we are looking forward to really creating those business outcomes as well. And I'm really a believer that this time's right. And with the right kind of execution, we'll be able to create that momentum.
Right, and execution is the key here in terms of really building on that energy and enthusiasm. That, of course, we have seen last week in terms of the participation that the summit received, and the businesses coming from India to attend the summit.
Yeah, and also we had more than 1,200 delegates, business delegates representing 200 plus businesses showcasing online, and obviously having the foreign minister. And that annual address was, the highlight of the whole summit as well. And she really summed up the relationship, the friendship, and the dosti that's going to drive the business outcome as well.
Right, India has an extraordinary past and a very extraordinary future. That's how she commented on India's relations. Dipen, you have advised several businesses in last 20, 25 years and very closely monitored the Australia-India space. What would you suggest in terms of building networks, relationships, and cultural intelligence when it comes to doing business? How important is that?
Look, when it comes to business, I think the most important part is the ability to get on with another person, and the ability to understand their culture is absolutely essential. So Jay said it earlier, the Consul General also mentioned in his comments, India has 28 states, Each state has a different language, different politics, different culture, different festivities. The macro and the microeconomics are very different from the state to a city-based opportunity. So as Ajay suggested, that it's important to see India from the perspective of not one holistic India, but from either one city or one state. If you take the cities of Mumbai and Delhi, both have around 25 million population, which is similar to Australia as a whole. And so you can see the kind of cultural nuances that you need to get to understand. For example, Mumbai is the finance capital of India. Delhi is the political capital of India. Down south on the east coast is very, the poets and the creatives and so on. So there's a perspective that you need to understand India at a whole holistic level, but when you're actually doing business culturally, it is said that Indians would prefer to become friends. And I'll give you an example of my experience in India. I've been traveling there often, and I've met with a number of diplomats in India from different countries. We talked about synergies between India and Australia. We talked about the language, English language, the Westminster legal system. We talked about the Commonwealth. The thing that we all know very well here is cricket. And cricket is a religion in India, as it is here. And if you tell an Indian that you're from Australia, there is a warm reception straight away. There's a conversation, a dialogue that starts immediately. Now, a lot of these diplomats that come from countries that don't play cricket were very jealous of Australia and Australians. So, to answer your question, it's essential to understand the culture. It's essential to understand, India from a holistic perspective, but also understanding your product and where it would fit best, which area of India it would fit best, and then learning those cultures, the politics, the macroeconomics, the microeconomics, and of course, learning a little bit about cricket.
Learning a little bit about cricket, of course. So market, consumer, as well as cultural focus to strategy is an integral component as you go forward. Ajay, what really, in terms of what sort of drivers and barriers should the Australian businesses be aware of, in terms of your engagement with Japanese clients and other international clients? What really, would you suggest to these businesses with respect to the India market from a regulatory perspective?
So, Natasha, actually, over the years, the regulatory barriers have far dropped now. Most of the sectors which we may be talking about in this room would fall under the automatic category and would allow you to set up a wholly owned subsidiary. So there is no issue of a barrier per se. If there are barriers, there are government approvals. If you're going to get into telecommunication beyond a particular limit, if you're going to get into aviation, so those sectors may not be of immediate concern to those people in the room. What I can say is that most of the people who would be tuned into this discussion, they can safely say that if we plan to come into India, we can enter India without any stress barrier. Of course, it is not saying that it's an easy ride. Saying that ease of doing business is one part. There are challenges, and I'm not going to shy away from saying that on ground zero, the realities can be a bit different. The problem is, and I've seen this very often, the problem is you come to India, you are going to export stuff to India, you decide a market based on some base research which you may have done at your end. And I'm coming from experience. I'm not coming from some novel I have read about India entry strategy. And then you meet some Indian chap, you like the Indian chap, you have had dinner with the Indian chap, and you decide, I've got my India strategy in place. And that's where the first fault happens. Your dinners and your first point of contact should be converted through great lawyers like AZB, which is right here. And Nashid, you owe me one for that. But what I'm really saying out there is that you need to get your consulting right in the first place. You talk to your partner, you define the rules of the game, you define it into a proper contract and get on with it. And trust me, Indians respect the written contract. Too much comfort drawn from family engagements and all is not the right way. So that's the first issue which you face. Second is you're defining what I had come to earlier also. what is my long-term strategy? And that's where the other thing comes in. If managing labor in India is a problem for you, if protecting your IPR is an issue for you, if running a distribution network is an issue for you, I'm just giving you 3 big examples, then you need an Indian partner, because this could be sorted out. Leaving out the IPR issue, of course, you don't want to share it. But if none of these are your challenges, then choosing an Indian partner is your choice. You could very well set up a wholly owned subsidiary, have a great manager to run your base, and get on with business. So I'm just giving you a base idea. There are limited challenges about regulatory aspect. There are routine ones. There are tax issues. If you wish, I can touch upon it now. If you wish me to touch upon it later, I'll do it. But the issues are, even the tax issues are what is defined, like Google tax. Who did it first? Australia did it, 2015. We copied it. Transfer pricing, where did it come from? Came from the US. I can elaborate, there are challenges there, but the issue about regulatory is limited. It's all about getting your entry strategy right and getting a consultant to convert it into a workable solution. That, I think, solves a lot of problems.
So getting your India strategy right and getting a right consultant. Ajay has strongly recommended ACB, so I'll go to the next speaker, ACB here. Nandish, what would you really suggest to the young companies in terms of companies which are still at a very fact-finding stage? What really would you suggest in terms of their India entry pathways? What methods will really work best for them?
Sure. And first, I'd like to thank Ajay for the kind recommendations. Much appreciated. In terms of the younger companies, I think there are 2 or 3 ways in which they can approach the market. And this is what we have typically seen, at least over the last 5 to 7 years. First, I think to Ajay's point, right, the essential consulting and fact finding to actually figure out what is the right way, right place, and right market entry strategy. I think that's critical. Without that, nothing's going forward. It could be by way of, starting a trade relationship, and particularly for a variety of sectors or goods for that matter. The trade relationship is important. That's where ECTA comes into the picture. That's where the other aspects that we've discussed come into the picture. The second is the startup economy, because that is something which is really picked up in the last 5 to 10 years. And that is an economy of itself that's growing. There are, literally dozens of startups that are, growing every year into unicorns. So tapping into that economy and sort of figuring out a way to tie up with them, that's the second suggestion that I would have. Now, whether that tie-up is by way of a sort of commercial arrangement, an IP arrangement, or whether it's actually an investment, and it could even be a minority investment, that's up to the facts of each case. And the last part is, of course, the general, a full-fledged India entry where you either set up a company or you do an M&A with an Indian company. It's a very, very vast topic. I don't think, we'll be able to do justice to that topic if I try to talk about points on that here. But broadly, these are the strategies that we've seen and would work. But it all starts off, as Ajay said, with, figuring out the right strategy for you in terms of your business.
Thank you for that, Nandish, and also for the company to understand what really their expectations are from the India market and what sort of tie-ups and engagements they are looking forward to. And of course, as you mentioned, startups, and just in terms of figures, what we have got is in just the 72 months of its launch, India is the 3rd in the world in number of unicorns, 2nd globally in number of startups, and 1st in the world in new startups adding every day. So that's the scale just in the startup ecosystem for India. Vish and Nashid, I have a common question for both of you, because as trade commissioners, you're actually attracting companies to the India market and also giving them all the reasons that why they should be coming to the India market. Vish, what sort of perceptions, assumptions, and anecdote assumptions you have, addressed from these companies in NSW when we talk about emerging economies like India? And do you have to struggle with these kind of assumptions on a daily basis? You're on mute, Vish.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And there are about 5 or 6 repeating sentiments and repeating experiences. The first is really the companies need to adapt their products for local conditions. That's very important. And I'm talking about price, scale, and a number of other variables, and a number of other guest speakers and panelists have mentioned the variability across the different economic zones of India. The second key point, Natasha, is find the right partner. And again, I think Ajay talked about that. Traditional family-run business versus global multinationals. And of course, the next generation of family conglomerates exist in India, and you need to be very mindful and aware of the nuances of finding the right partner. The third one, again, is size, scale, and I would just add leapfrogging effect. And Manish Gupta talked about that in his opening remarks, but companies such as Reliance or Adani, Renew Energy, Sterlite Power, for example, L&T, they've all got very strong balance sheets. They've got very excellent technical capability. If you are going to enter India, you need to understand your niche, your product specialty, and your differentiated services that you can either work with these large Indian conglomerates that are really now in a very aggressive global stance. What is your niche? And then, of course, technology transfer, licensing agreements, they're very important. And whether you move into a JV, and I think Ajay talked about it, and Nandish also touched upon protection of IP. The fourth one is, and Dipen talked about it, establishing warm relations. You need to meet virtually on a regular basis with your stakeholders. And, I would recommend it at least twice a year to come to India and engage and understand the differences and the similarities. And that, of course, builds trust. And trust is the underpinning of any economic relationship. The fifth one, Natasha, is get to know India. It's not just, the music and the dance and the colors. There's a very, very sophisticated trading and commercial background in this country. And you need to understand the nuances of that, what works, what doesn't, and what is now moving to world's best practice from a rigor point of view. And be aware of new and emerging superclass of technocrats in this country. And let me just illustrate that point. There's an investor of ours from India that's looking at hydrogen projects, came to Australia, and then moved to Middle East and is now establishing a $6 billion investment in the port of Duqm in Oman. They've got strong balance sheets. They've got excellent capability, globally best practice joint ventures. We need to move very quickly, not just in India, but in Australia. So we need to be aware of that. And the last point, the sixth point, is to engage with DFAT. Allan talked about it. DFAT, engage with Indian consul offices in the region globally. Austrade and engage with the state agencies, and Nashid talked about it. Access to government is very important. And then also, critically, the last point in the sixth category, Natasha, is the think tanks. And Irfan mentioned AIBC and what they're doing. That's very important. But policy and legislative reform for India is important. Policy and legislation, we need to have our stakeholders in Australia put the sufficient visibility for India to adhere to some of the experiences of countries such as Australia or the US or Europe. And that's very important. And you'll find that Indian policymakers are very adaptable and they need to have that input from people like us. So they're the 6 major things that we're seeing and we're reinforcing from a, I guess, an NSW point of view, but I think it applies more generally.
Thanks very much for that very thorough overview, Vish, because it really captures the very essence of what the Australian businesses must understand about India. And in terms of having a very multi-layered approach and a holistic approach when you engage with the India market, and also the fact realizing that there's a very categorical, enabling ecosystem that is available that can help you navigate the complexity of the India market, which is already there. Final comments from you, Nashid. I'm also conscious that you'll be leaving, you're actually flying out from Mumbai. So quickly, your comments, because now the big task is for you to advise the WA businesses. And the fact that they decided to be on this mission in large numbers, what was the struggle like in terms of addressing their assumptions, perceptions?
I think the main thing was expectation management, Natasha. We had about 3 pre-briefings before we took the delegation on the mission. And it was really, really key to be able to set those expectations that you're not going to go in there and land a deal. It is about also thinking out of the box. You may have a product and service, but think about that supply chain and that ecosystem. Our relationship with India is not just about trading or investment. It's more about a conversation around supply chain integration. So how do we become a part of that ecosystem is a big piece of the conversation. Alongside that, I think the other key aspects are really about the talent, the skill shortage issues that we have. And I think that's another big piece of ECTA. So I think ECTA's really brought in a lot of attraction around it. And now it's that proof of recognitions of skills. It's really looking at, how the vet sector, for example, is sort of impacted with the current policies in play and how that can be unlocked or looked at more reflectively on what is needed to address our needs as well. And it's also thinking out of the box. You've obviously got, that end of where WA businesses can set up shop. And look, the larger end of town in WA do that. But if you look across Australia, 95 to 98% are also small businesses. They're mum and pop businesses. So, how do you make sure that they have thought, and, Ajay and Nandish, those comments were really, really well received, that, you've got to think of that whole thing from a HR perspective, from a legal perspective, from an accounting perspective, when you are doing that trading. And I think that technology piece that Vish was talking about is incredibly important because, when you think about the innovation ecosystems that India has, I would love to have unicorns and soonicorns in WA. But at the same time, if you think of that whole scale of what is there in India, can you imagine some of our medtech companies, which Allan was referring to before was, if they're in India and using that as their test market and the sort of variety of challenges that would help test and proof that, there is, a lot to look into. I think the ease of doing business and that economic reform was a deliberate reason why we took our delegation to Delhi. I think it was very important for them to understand that. And also the fact that ECTA is the start of that unity. But I think there is a lot to sort of unfold and also some of the vulnerabilities that are there and to be equipped to address that. So I think, being able to manage those expectations, Natasha, is incredibly important. There's a lot of excitement and hype. And I think alongside that, it's being able to say, what do you do to get to that next step? Or what do you do to think sidewards rather than upwards?
Thanks for that, very rich insights, Nashid. So, of course, looking at vulnerabilities, not as vulnerabilities, but possibly as virtues of the India market, as we generally say, because there's so much for the India market to offer. Final comments from you, Irfan. We've heard too much about ECTA as well, and we would want to know when ECTA will actually come, will be a full-fledged trade agreement. And at this stage, how do you see business councils really playing a role, connecting with DFAT, connecting with the government and making this happen as soon as possible?
Sure. Again, Natasha, before I go into that, I definitely heard a lot of startup stories, and I just want to add to that because I live and breathe in that space. Indian market, I mean, again, we heard Invest India CEO say that there's adding one startup every 9 days, and there's about 75,000 startups registered. What I really want to also highlight, the Indian market is, especially for startups, is really driven by sustainable entrepreneurship and social innovation. So there's a huge opportunity for startups for purpose aligned with to UN SDG goals. There's a huge market. That's like the target market that you need to tap into. One of the things which I would just reflect on AIBC there, and I'll probably use a series of acronyms just to highlight what we do. At AIBC, we use the 3 A's. We essentially drive awareness through our literacy program, connecting with across various industry sectors with partners on the India market opportunity. We create access to pathways, so how to enable outcomes, market access programs, working again with partners like NGG or other industry partners as well. And then we help drive adoption. We want to get those runs on the board, templatize how to, so that we can replicate that with more businesses. We are structured industry sector focused. We've got about 10 to 12 industry sectors where we continue to drive some of those sector specific events, partnering with all our partners, whether in Australia or India. So Business Council of Australia, Export Council, Business New South Wales, and in India, Invest India, CII, FICCI, all those industry partners we closely work, but also our Gulf partners, whether it's Investment New South Wales, Austrade, DFAT here, and also the Consulate and the High Commission. We closely work with them to enable some of those outcomes as well. One of the things which I want to highlight, which we are driving at AIBC, definitely the startup ecosystem. Typically, when there is a bilateral opportunity, the SMLE segments, the small, medium scale, large enterprises benefit. I've been driving a SMILES framework, which is SMILES, which is also recognizes indigenous First Nation businesses as well as startups as well. So we believe that indigenous businesses and startups have a great opportunity with the Indian market, and we want to definitely drive and facilitate that as well. We also do very much sector-based specific events, business delegations, which again, we partner with various Gov agencies, but also our own delegations we facilitate. We facilitate buy-seller matching program, working closely with the Gov bodies as well, whether it's the Indian High Commission or the Consulate, and also with Austrade into India as well. What I will definitely highlight that industry partners working with our member organizations and specific, specialized consultants, help us build the right partnership to, get the impact and outcome. And just taking a cue from what Manish Gupta ji mentioned, the P's of patience. I want to quote Dr. Peter Varghese, who's the architect of the India Economic Strategy, where he highlighted the 4 P's, which is the planning, preparation, perseverance, but also the right partners and partnership. And that's something which, as Business Council, we will work with our partners, industry partners, and our members to facilitate those partnership outcomes as well.
Right. So but I'll come back to my question on ECTA, because that's something which we're really looking forward to. That what sort of enabling how AIBC and other organizations really see this happening by the end of this year.
Yeah,
that's
so
what we're looking for.
I think, definitely just touching on that, and I'm closely working with both the chief negotiators here, Francis Lusson from Australia and Amit Yadavji from India. One of the conversations I had was how we've got all the top line outcomes that's been outlined. What I'm keen to do is with councils to across and identify 5 or 6 sectors, and that's where we want to work on some low-hanging fruits. In fact, we looked at some PLI schemes opportunities in India as well. So business opportunities as business councils, we want to get some of those business outcomes happen across those sectors. We want to have runs on the board. We want to have, even like looking at food and agri, we know there are a lot of tariffs removed. However, on the ground, there are certain challenges, whether it's logistics, the pricing, even certain conformance, to standards, harmonization of standards. All these things need to be enabled and cleared before, the rubber hits the road and the outcomes are there. So this is where we come into play, really smoothen get some specific rounds on the board across each of the sectors. And that will really help validate some of these outcomes and opportunities. And that's what we are looking in the next 6 months to work with our partners and industry partners as well.
Thanks for that, Irfan, because that's what all of us are expecting, that we are able to close the deal by end of this year, the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, which is one of its kind, and also a trade deal signed, first trade deal in a decade signed by India with any developed economy. So says a lot about the Australia-India bilateral relationship and how it has transitioned and how it has elevated in the last 3 to 4 years since 2019 and since the signing of the AI Act as well. Thank you very much, speakers who joined us today online. Thank you for your time and your rich insights, very invaluable, and the fact that you have really touched upon different components of this relationship, and also how Australian businesses that are keen to enter the India market, what sort of strategy they should have. Thanks very much, Vish, Allan, Ajay, Nandish, and Nashid for joining us today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Irfan and Dipen, also for joining us in person. Over to you.
Thank you for the very engaging discussion, and for participating as speakers in tonight's panel discussion. Once again, Vish, Ajay, Nandish, Nashid online, and also Irfan, Dipen, and Natasha in person. We'd like to do a Q&A, but I think given the interest of time, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in writing, and we'll aim to direct them to the right person for a response. I hope you have found tonight's events educational and insightful. I certainly have. The conventional wisdom is that India has a lot to learn from Australia. I'd suggest that one of the key takeaways for me tonight is that actually the opposite is true. Australia has a lot to learn from India. For example, I think we need an Australian version of the digital Aadhaar card. Given a recent experience I had when I was turned away from a venue interstate for not having my physical driver's license. Some other takeaways. I think it's very clear that there is very strong strategic and political will to make India into Australia's key major trading partner, both from a trade and investment perspective. We need to leverage the movement in India's economic liberalization, as Mr. Manish mentioned, from 1991, its reform, its transformation, and its sheer scale to grasp economic opportunities. There is a great alignment of values. As Dipen mentioned, it is the world's largest democracy. There is an alignment of culture. There is a commonality in cricket, in English, for example. And there are also economic complementarities. Australia's natural resources and India's IT and medical technology expertise. And the final takeaway for me was the diversity of India. Its different peoples, its regional economies, its government structures. For example, there are 28 states, and 8 union territories. So that's potentially 29 trade and investment officers to assist you in your trade and investment journey. Now, calls to action. What do we do after tonight? We're great hearing these speakers, present and share their expertise. But the key thing is action. And I exhort, the audience members here tonight, in person and those joining us online, to do 4 things. First, export to India. Second, import from India. Third, invest in India. And finally, leverage the subject matter experts, whether they be from government, industry associations, business, or professional service providers, and their networks here tonight to help you with your journey, in doing so. On behalf of Professionals in International Trade, PIT, I'd like to once again thank our partners for tonight's event. So the Consulate General of India for hosting this event in the venue, Newland Global Group, and also the Avensis Group. Again, thank you to our guest speakers who have joined us online. So that's Allan, Vish, Ajay, Nandish, and Nashid. Our guest speakers who joined us in person, Manish, Dipen, Irfan, Natasha. We're going to share the details and context of our speakers with all the attendees. And finally, but perhaps most importantly, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for tonight's event. It could not have happened without your attendance and your participation. In closing, thank you once again to our guests who have joined us online. Stay safe out there. And to you all here, have a good evening ahead. While this wraps up the formal part of tonight's event, please continue to join us for networking and drinks, which I understand will go on to approximately 8:50. Thank you.